everybody, and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today's episode, we welcome Darrell Miller, who is one of the brand new chairs of the IETF working group on building blocks for HTTP APIs. Hey, Darrell, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks a lot for taking the time to answer a couple of questions. Today, I just want to raise a little bit awareness of that new working group that really came into being right now and ask you just a few questions around your opinions. But first and foremost, so to speak, almost, I'm wondering, why did you accept that role to work as one of the chairs of that new working group?
I mean, I accepted the role because HTTP has been something that I have been very interested in for a number of years, and it's something I've done a lot of talking about. It's something that has been very much a part of the work that I've done for probably close to 15 years now. And Mark Nottingham approached me and asked if I thought it would be a good idea for this group to come about and if I was interested in being involved. And I actually got to meet Mark last year at the HTTP workshop group, which is where a lot of the folks who involved in the HTTP working group get together. It's not a formal IETF affair. But Mark had recognized that HTTP APIs were becoming a very critical part of the internet and the amount of people using the internet, not just for web browsing with browsers, but actually doing machine-to-machine communication with APIs. It's such a critical part of our day-to-day businesses.
That's a really good point, I think. It's still amazing, at least for some people, HTTP still is the protocol that browsers speak. And of course it is, but if you look at some of the traffic trends on the web, right, or on the internet, maybe we should say it like this, right? It's APIs are probably outpacing browsers already or sometime soon.
Yeah, and I mean, we've tried many times in the past to make protocols to make machines work together, but HTTP is just really, really good at doing this loosely coupled cross-organizational type of communication that is just foundational to today's global economy.
It seems to be. That definitely looks like it. You already have spent quite a bit of time in the standard space. You've been, I don't know what the official term is, you've chaired the open API specification work or something like that?
I am a member of the technical steering committee, which is a group of 6 of us who are nominated, and we co-collaborate on writing the open API specification.
Okay, so, but you have a fairly significant role there and you've had that for quite some time. So what I wanted to ask is, how do you see that your work in that new working group, the IETF HTTP API working group, how that will differ from your open API work that you've done so far?
Yes, I'm expecting to do a lot of learning. IETF has a very long and storied history. In comparison, the OAI is just kind of a newbie, and we founded the OAI and we kind of made things up as we went along as what is the best way that we can bring value to customers. But there's so much process and procedures behind the IETF because they control such critical parts of the internet infrastructure. And so it's essential for that process to exist. One of the reasons Rich is co-chairing with me is to just kind of show me the ropes of how the processes work, how the working groups work, and how the sausage is made, as it were. So I expect to be doing a whole lot of learning. And I mean, really the great thing about having this work done in the IETF is there are so many people there that have so many years of experience in the standard space. Like, they can tell you, yeah, we tried that thing 15 years ago, and here were all the real world impacts of when we actually allowed that and we made that kind of change. And they have that familiarity with the whole ecosystem of the internet, not just 1 or 2 protocols. You'll see things, area chairs and working group chairs will have experience in a variety of different areas. So the depth of knowledge is just phenomenal. And that's why they're able to, that's why they've been so successful for so many years at building standards that last for so long.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. It's really impactful and very, by this point, I think very traditional, most almost organization that really has done a lot of things that affect everybody nowadays, pretty much.
Yeah, and they have a backward compatibility mentality that a lot of, the app developers in us, who, we go to build an app and we go, okay, what's the latest shiny framework? Oh, we'll go build this and we'll build a project on it and then we'll move on and go do something else, right? We don't have that same need for longevity in many of the things that we work on. But when it comes to, making a change to the HTTP protocol and the amount of people that impacts, I mean, we sit there in the Open API specification committee going, ooh, if we add this new feature, how many people is it going to impact? And we worry about these things. When you're changing internet level standards, you're affecting multiple orders of magnitude more people when you introduce changes.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I like that because I think also for APIs, we see that more and more organizations are critically depending on APIs, their ecosystems become bigger and bigger. So for them, it also makes a lot of sense to add more and more of this kind of discipline, I think, into their API culture that places a bigger emphasis on this kind of backwards compatibility and stuff. One question I have for you is because I just love the name of the working group alone, Building Blocks for HTTP APIs. I think that's a wonderful name. One of the things that I think is sometimes a little bit complicated is, let's say, if we look at a spectrum of possible API design. So on the one hand, you may see like a vertical standard that does everything for you. So you just take that and that's what you build or what you implement, so to speak. And that very often is not there or you don't like it for whatever reason. And then on the other end of the spectrum is I do everything myself. Maybe I need some foundation. I probably nowadays will use HTTP and JSON, but that's about it. And then the rest very often is let's just do something. And I think the interesting thing is there in the middle, this is where the building blocks are. So the more I can actually assemble building blocks, the less I have to reinvent wheels. And those building blocks have a good chance of maybe being a little bit more robust, maybe having more support and tooling, being understood more easily by developers. So I think there's a lot to be said that the more I can use building blocks, the better my API may be. What I want to ask you is, how do you think, what would be the best way or a good way to encourage and help designers and developers more to go this, let's first really look for building blocks route instead of let's just do HTTP and then just build something?
I think the first thing, again, it's building blocks for HTTP APIs. So the foundation is HTTP. And there are a set of extension points that are well defined within HTTP. And it's clear in our charter that we're not about inventing new extension points. We're about using those extension points. So introducing new headers, introducing potentially new HTTP methods, media types. So working within that framework is what allows all of the pieces of the puzzle to come together. And I think the focus on building blocks as opposed to holistic solutions is really important for a number of reasons. One, it's important because when you build a holistic solution, you have a certain set of scenarios in mind that you are trying to enable. And if you try and hit a really broad set of scenarios, you're going to build a fairly sophisticated and complex and difficult to learn holistic solution. If you focus on just a few solutions, then you're going to build something that might work great, but only benefits a few people. If you build building blocks, you have such a larger reach and you have the combinational type ability to be able for people to use those building blocks together As long as you're sticking with the foundations and the fundamental principles of HTTP, it just allows us to reach a much wider audience. And the other critical thing is so much of this work on standards is done in people's extra time. It's not the core part of the job that they were hired to do. And this is why splitting these things down into little pieces is so critical. I remember the first time I actually dug into a spec and actually wrote a library to implement a spec. It was the RFC 6570, the URI template spec. And I read the spec from end to end, and there was little implementation notes, and I converted that into actual code. And I published a library.
That was a tough one to pick, I would say.
Well, it was something. It was an itch that I needed to scratch in the things that I wanted to do, but it was a manageable size of thing, right? It wasn't like I was setting off on a 6-month project to do. It was a couple of weekends of work, and there was more work after that, but I got the basic thing working in that kind of time frame. And I published that as an open source project, and there's still people using it. I'm still using it, 6 or 7 years later. And it is fundamentally something that can be used in a wide variety of scenarios. Mine isn't the only implementation. There are other implementations out there, so people can pick and choose. And this is the beauty of defining these things in standards, right? Is there can be other implementations that come along at a later point in time. There isn't the requirement that one org produce implementations in every possible language. There's a spec that defines this is what the behavior is. And I think just looking further down the road, there's so much potential we have. I mean, just some of the little things that have happened, like Mark's JSON problem. Let me see if I can remember, 7807, I think it is.
Yeah.
Microsoft have adopted that as their error format in their library, right? And it was just because let's not just reinvent some new thing. Here's a standard. It's got enough traction. People are asking for it. Let's not invent something new. Let's just go reuse that thing. And the more we can do that, the more interoperability we get and the less reinventing the wheel that we have.
I think that raises an excellent question to my mind in terms of, it's, of course, I think you sold it very well. It's very useful to have these building blocks because tooling can be built, libraries can be built, and so forth. But that also means that I need to know which building blocks exist so that I maybe know which libraries even to look for or which building blocks to use for my API design. And that's another question I have for you. And that is, if I am, let's say, in one of two, I would say, major API related roles we see right now out there. One of them would be you work in an actual product team and your job is developing an API for that specific product. Maybe you design it, you implement it, some combination of that. And the second role would be you're more in the API platform team. So you're really at the organizational level of making sure that APIs are used effectively throughout the organization. For those two roles, what would you say, what is the best way how they can follow the work of the working group so that they don't get, like you said, right, it's mostly in their free time, so to speak, or it's not their full-time job, but what level of understanding would you say is good so that people can actually get the most benefit out of the work that the working group is going to do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously not everybody is going to have the time nor the interest or inclination to follow the mailing list and show up for IETF meetings and so on and so forth, or write specs. But what I would really like for people is to be aware of the existence of the standards and to advocate for people to use them. If you're writing API guidelines, don't go write your own error format. Again, there are standards, right? Learn the registries that exist. A lot of people don't realize this. IETF drive a set of registries for these extension points that I mentioned, and they're listed under IANA. And you go to your favorite search engine and you type IANA status codes. you get the status code registry. IANA media types, you'll get the media type registry. IANA headers, you'll get the header registry. Go look there first, right? Those are the directories of those extension points that have already been registered. They have links to all of the RFCs from the IETF that are all kind of in a standardized format. Yes, they're a bit funky to read at first, and it takes a little bit of getting used to. They're not quite as pretty, although they're getting better. I was going to say they're not quite as pretty as like the Mozilla docs, which are awesome, by the way. But there are so many kind of secondary listings of status codes on the web, right? Don't go there. Go to the original source, right? And that is a discovery model. If you're an API guideline creator, try and stick with the standards. If there isn't a standard that fits, yell and say, hey, there should be a standard that does this, to somebody who will listen to you, right? And find other people who have similar needs. We have this working group now whose sole responsibility is to identify where there are these needs, and hopefully we can start filling the gaps in the HTTP API space. And if you are an actual implementer, look for the tools that you're using and the frameworks that you're using. And if somebody doesn't support those standards, request it, like open an issue and say, is there a reason why we're not using this standard, right? It will end up making the implementer's life easier further down the road, and it will make interoperability better further down the road. So, I mean, it's going to have to be a collective effort. But there's so much evidence of the benefit of us building things on top of standards in the past that it should be fairly easy to convince people of the value.
I completely agree. I have a challenge for you, because you were just mentioning registries, and I've done the same thing. Sometimes I've talked for actually quite a while to people about, standards organizations and registries, and please use standards, it's good for you. And my challenge for you is, so IETF, of course, does much, much more, and not just HTTP. So they have a lot of registries for all kinds of things. How many registries do you think IETF has for everything? All the registries that IANA is managing.
There's probably 30 that are just related to HTTP. If you really dig into
those, yeah.
As
1,000. That's a very good estimate. I think right now, I would need to check what it is now. Last time I checked, it was, I think, around 1,400, 13 to 1,400. So yeah, and of course all kinds of things, right? Like packet types in TCP and who knows what. But yeah, it's really important, right? And without those things, all the standards wouldn't. Well, they would function, but actually the registry model is so nice because it allows those standards to be evolved over time. And I think that is something that in a lot of organizations also could be used, and it's not used enough.
Yeah, absolutely. It is that extension point that as a developer, you need to be aware of, that there are different extensions here, and you need to know what to do when you run into an extension that you don't recognize. Yeah. But it gives that longevity to the standards.
And that's a good lead up to my last question for you. So my last question, you already mentioned that, but I would like to ask about that specifically. So you mentioned the charter, so that the working group is specifically chartered to work on HTTP extension points like header fields, status codes, media types, these kind of things. It's specifically chartered to not work on vertical standards. And it's specifically chartered, I think, to not work on kind of local APIs for libraries and these kind of things. So I think I like the focus. I was just wondering, do you think it would have ideally worked better to make it even more focused, or maybe to include something else?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about divide and conquer and finding the right granularity. It's, we have one of the harder divisions to figure out is going to be what stays in HTTP API working group and what goes into the actual HTTP working group. And there's already been a number of conversations about how are we going to make that divide. The whole idea of the vertical standards is just it's not scalable to go to vertical standards, and we likely, the people involved in the HTTP API working group, probably won't have the domain expertise in order to focus on those vertical standards. So the size, the way it's been scoped out today, I think is a reasonable thing. Not dealing with specific APIs. We're not dealing with HTTP APIs in any implementation language, so we're staying well away from that. It is purely based on, as I say, the HTTP protocol extensions, the things that are going to be going over the wire. And I think that will be more than enough scope in order to keep us busy and keep enough things on the docket. And it's important to recognize this, the charter is fairly much a trial, right? There has been some concern with the IETF in that this working group has not been created to solve a specific problem, right? So this is normally a working group is chartered to solve a specific thing. We are there to solve problems related to HTTP APIs, and there's going to be a review in 6 to 12 months to kind of go, okay, is this working? If it isn't working, then we'll shut it down. All right. So it's there. There are already a number of proposals that I think would be great to bring on board. And the key here is to make sure that we can bring that through the process fairly quickly, so that we can actually deliver value. Because again, nobody wants to be sitting on a standard for 18 months, 2 years, because it doesn't deliver value for that period of time. So there will be some challenges, but I think it's a great effort, and I think it has the potential to deliver a lot of value. Now we just have to go get the work done.
I'll take you up on that one. I have a couple of things that I want to get through there. So
I know. We shall talk.
Yes, that's a different conversation to have. But the one thing, just from my side, and I have no idea how this could possibly work, but I think what would be great would be to have some way, if there are verticals, which I totally agree, they have the domain knowledge, they should do their own thing in whatever organization they have, but to have some kind of, review process, something, because sometimes you run into these vertical standards and you look at them and you wonder, it's like, what were they thinking? It's like, didn't they have anybody even, looking at it and pointing out some pretty obvious things? So sometimes I think that would be great to have something that, like a review board that could do that for standards that might have a relatively large impact before they actually get released. But I have zero idea how that could be done. So.
That's absolutely fascinating. And because when I'm wearing my other hat over in the Open API initiative, we have a lot of interest we have the Travel Industry Alliance are members of the Open API initiative, the geospatial organizations, and there's a lot of interest in Open API from an industry specific perspective. And I mean, in my day job at Microsoft, I sit on API review boards, and we review APIs that have been created. It would be very interesting to know whether that would be a role the Open API initiative could play as basically API reviewers for industry verticals, by looking at the Open API descriptions that they create and saying, yes, these APIs are consistent with other industry standards, consistent with HTTP. And I've really struggled, until you asked that question, to understand what value the OAI could bring to industry verticals. But that's exactly it.
Okay.
So thank you, Eric.
Good closing word. So, well, I think, I've gone through all my questions. Once again, I would like to thank you for spending a little bit of time to answer those questions. I will help this effort in any way I can. I think it's a really important one, and I think it will help the whole space and community a lot. Are there any last words from your side? Something you would like to add, something you would like to mention when it comes to that new working group?
If you have opinions about HTTP, get involved.
Okay, that's nice. Nice.
It's as simple as that, really. many hands make light work, right?
Yeah.
All of us are busy, and we need community contributions in order. Like, if you just sit back and go, oh, okay, well, we'll let everybody define the standards, and then build the tooling, and then I'll just go use it. Guess what? Somebody might not do that, right? So if you care, come get involved.
Yes, I very much agree with that. If you care, be involved. The working group literally started this week. So this is the last week of October of 2020, but we'll see what kind of standards will come out of it. I hope we'll see activity picking up very soon. I think a first meeting is scheduled for later this week, right? So
November 20th at the
November
IETF 109.
But soon. Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Once again, thanks so much, Darrell, for spending this time with us. Thanks. And I really hope that this group will take off. And I would like to encourage everybody one last time to come and join the effort. And with that, we're done for today. Thanks, Darrell.
Thank you very much, Eric.
See you soon. Bye. Bye.